be tough.
You lucky crab.
There it is. Oh, we got one. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about everything you need to know about a Carolina rig, a bunch of tips and tricks to help you catch in more fish all summer long on this guy right here. That guy's just a little one, but hopefully we'll catch some bigger ones throughout the day. We're gonna let him go and we're gonna get to talking about the Carolina rig. All right, so as we mentioned in today's intro, we're gonna be talking about the Carolina rig. It's one of my favorite baits for fishing all summer long, but it makes an excellent spring and fall bait as well, depending on where you live. A lot of these places, though it's more popular on other lakes than some. It just depends on what your body of water has. So the lake we're on today has a bunch of grass up shallow, but that grass actually tapers off, and on the outside edge there's hard spots, there's brush piles, there's bluegill beds, there's all kinds of little areas that these fish can be. So we're going to be fishing a lot of that stuff today and seeing if we can find anything out there, dragging the Carolina rig around, and that makes an excellent search bait in a sense for fishing those types of areas out there. However, you're not really searching for these. You want to do your searching behind the wheel with your fish finders before you actually make your cast. So we've already done that. I've been to this lake numerous times and I kind of know where these fish live, and a hard spot will never move. So if you have a hard spot marked, you can just pull up on it in the future and make your cast out there and catch those fish. I use the Carolina rig when I find those spots to really soak my bait in that area. No matter how windy it gets, you can adjust your presentation to fish that. Today, it's not windy at all, but there's a lot of pressure. So then what I can do is adjust my bait selection to get more bites in those types of areas. You can throw something a little more finesse and keep it down there on the bottom and get a lot of bites in those areas rather than throwing like a deep crankbait or a big swim bait or anything like that. I use it just to get a lot of bites, and by rule of numbers, essentially, you're gonna eventually run into a couple big ones by doing that. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. We're gonna run through the rod and reel line setup here. My actual Carolina rig setup, I have a video of this already, so I'll link it at the end of today's video. I've gone over the entire rig, how I set it up from start to finish to make sure you break no fish off, you keep it down in the strike zone, you do everything you need to do with your Carolina rig to make sure your bait's performing properly. The only thing I'm gonna mention, I'm using a 1/2 ounce weight today. Anytime I'm fishing less than 15 foot of water or no wind at all, I'll be using a 1/2 ounce weight. If it's higher winds, deeper water, that's when I'll go to a 3/4 or even an ounce. But for today, the 1/2 ounce is gonna get it done there. And then our bait selection for the day has been a 3/0 hook with a Zoom speed worm on the end here, but you can literally use anything, and we'll talk about that in bait selection just in a second here. As for the rod and reel, there's a couple important things that I need to mention here. One, length of rod is very important when it comes to a Carolina rig. As you can tell, this leader is very long, and that makes it very cumbersome when you're trying to cast this bait. So this is actually the Cash and Icon Carolina rig rod. It's literally made for this, and I absolutely love this rod. You don't need this exact rod, but if you want to support the channel, the links to all the products in today's video will be down in the description below, and by purchasing through any of those links, you'll be helping me out a ton. But this rod right here, this is a 7'6" heavy action rod, so it allows you to throw those heavier weights. You can throw really heavy if you need to, up to an ounce and a half. I know some guys up on like the St. Lawrence River, they'll use like an 1.5 ounce weight because the current's so strong to keep their bait down there. I've never really fished a weight that heavy. I usually stay in that 1/2 to 1 ounce range, but this rod's made to handle that as well. So that 7'6" rod's really gonna get you that far cast out there, and then it's also gonna allow you to load up on those fish with that long cast. You're gonna be able to pull all the slack out of your line and get a good hook set and be able to reel those fish into the boat. And then I have a Shimano MGL Corrado right here. This is the 150. I spool it up with straight 17-pound test fluorocarbon. I talked a little bit about that in my rigging video as well, but I use the higher gear ratio here just so I can pick up my slack, especially if a fish eats it and comes right towards you. They're not gonna feel that weight because of how the Carolina rig is rigged. They can slide around with that weight and they don't feel it. So they might bite it and come right at you, and you'll have to pick up a lot of slack when you set the hook on this fish. So I go with the higher gear ratio there, but I'm not using the reel to move the bait. I actually use the rod to move the bait, and we'll talk about that while we're out on the water. But I use that 17-pound test as well because I'll use a lighter leader so that if I get hung up, I'll just break off my leader and I'll be able to retie and get back to fishing. So that's the rod and reel setup there. And then when it comes to bait selection, there's numerous bait options you can use. As I mentioned, Zoom Speed Worm, that's the one that we're really using today a lot. Mostly because it's gonna get us a lot of bites. It's basically a Senko profile, but has just a little tail kick, adds a little bit of something down there in the water. You could probably just drag a regular Senko around and you'd catch a lot of fish. A couple of the other ones that I like to use, if you have a lot of bluegills or crawfish in the area, like the 6th Sense Bongo or a Zoom Speed Craw is another good one, something in that crawfish shape. And then 2 others, depending on the conditions that you have. Like I mentioned, just that plain Senko look, so the Ned Fry from 6th Sense, just a little Ned straight tail worm bait, just a do-nothing worm. That'll get a lot of bites when the fishing is tough. And then the old standby, some type of lizard. This is the 6th Sense Hog Walla right here. Any type of bait like that that has those curly tails that you can drag around and produces action when you're pulling your bait. So those are the types of baits that I'm going to go with, and then ultimately decide your color based on your water clarity. We've been using green pumpkin today. We have slightly stained water, but it's enough to really stand out, and all these fish are feeding on like perch and bluegills, so that's a really good color to go with. If you have dirtier water, you can go black and blue. Just use your water clarity to determine your color. But now that we talked about the rod and reel setup, let's get back out on the water, start fishing some more, and show you how to fish this Carolina rig and catch a couple more fish. So now that we talked about the setup for a Carolina rig, the rod and reel stuff, why it works, we're gonna go ahead and fish this thing around right here. So as you can see on my 360 right here, off to the left, there's a bunch of bluegill beds, which are these little guys right here. They're very subtle. Those are probably actually old ones that are kind of getting silted in, but that still indicates that there's hard bottom there, and there's a couple stumps out here as well. So we're fishing a hard bottom area, and a Carolina rig's a perfect place for that. It's actually really good for dragging on this. One, because you won't get hung up very much because that big weight keeps it from getting hung up in any of that rock down there. And also, that bigger weight allows you to feel what's on the bottom out there and really make sure that you're making contact and coming through the cover properly. A lot of these places we're fishing today are very, very small, and they're actually maybe a 50-yard section that these fish are actually gonna live in. So you can throw that bait out there and you can feel the grass first and make sure you're working your way through the grass. And then once you get through the grass and into the prime cover, you can slow down and really work your bait in place there and make sure that you're keeping your bait in the strike zone longer. So the biggest thing with a Carolina rig is just don't get in a hurry. A lot of people want to get in a hurry with it. They want to fish it really, really fast. As you can see, I'm fishing this thing here. I'm literally pulling it over every single little rock that's down there and just popping it through each little shell, hard spot, anything down there on the bottom. And that's what's going to get you the most amount of bites while doing this. So we're slowly dragging it, and we're just going to keep working it through these hard spots. And then if this one doesn't work out, there's no more down here, we'll just jump to the next one. And that's really all we're doing, is we're just slowly working this thing along the bottom. It's going to keep you from getting hung up, like I said, with that big weight. As if you want to see the rigging video on this, I'll link it at the end, and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about on how we rig this up to keep it from getting stuck. But basically, we're just dragging it nice and slow, and that's what we're going to keep on doing. So we'll get back to fishing here and see if we can get us another one. And you'll notice that these casts take a very long time to actually fish in, and that's okay. We are targeting certain areas to actually fish this. It's not like you're covering water. You're going to actually already side scan these areas, have those areas picked apart, and really target them. So we're working with like a 2.5, 3 foot leader here. It's the late summer. You can go with a longer leader. I just generally throw about a 3-footer just because it's easier to cast. If you try and go longer, it makes it harder. But the biggest thing with a Carolina rig is your cast. So we're actually gonna make a really, really long cast with this. And to do that, I'm gonna bring my rod to the side down low and throw sidearm and finish up high and let that Carolina rig go. And that'll keep your weight from separating from your bait. So we'll go ahead, make a really long cast like that, way out there, let that thing sink all the way down to the bottom, and then we'll just go ahead and drag it. And that's where that 7/6 rod comes into play too, that you can actually get that long cast and get that bait up off the water rather than slapping the water on your cast. And it really helps on setting the hook on these fish too. So as you saw on that first one, when I set the hook on him, he kind of swam right at me, but I had enough rod to kind of keep that tension on him and keep him coming towards me. And that's the key for keeping some of these fish hooked. Usually with the Carolina rig, if you get a good hook set on them, they're not going to come off. And hopefully if we can get another one here, we'll show you what the hook set's like to make sure you're landing a lot of these fish as well. That's one of the cast is a very big thing. One, making sure you're throwing it in the right area, landing it on top of fish, key spots that you're trying to throw to. and making sure it's long enough. The retrieve is very important, making sure you're fishing it very slow and keeping it in front of the fish long enough. And then lastly is your hook set. So we've talked about the cast, we talked about the retrieve. Lastly, we just got to show you how to set the hook on these fish and make sure you get them in the boat. This is like a 95% land ratio on the Carolina rig. So it's something that's very important, and we'll show you that here very shortly, hopefully. So I got a bite right here. All we're gonna do is reel down tight with it and sweep through like that. And then you go ahead and stick them good. That's actually a good fish. You can see I sweep all the way around, make sure I make contact with him, and just keep winding and keep tight with that fish. Then you can get him all the way up, flip him on right up in the boat. So that's everything. He's got a little leech in his mouth, but you can see he actually kind of came down on it because that hook's in the bottom of his mouth. But we're gonna go ahead and pop him off. We're gonna get to filming some other videos here today because we gotta catch up. We've been lacking on the videos, but we're gonna catch up for you guys. That's a decent one right there. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video talking about the Carolina rig. If you wanna see the rigging video, go ahead and check this one out right here. We go fully in depth, everything you need to know, how to rig it up like that, and then you come out here, apply those fishing techniques that we talked about earlier, places to look for, catch some fish like that. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.